very nervous to talk about this. I don't know if you can tell from my demeanor. I want to talk about the court case with E. Jean Carroll and Donald Trump being considered civilly liable for sexual assault. I'm nervous to talk about this because I know it's controversial. I think a lot of people don't want to speak up and say anything that might be construed as in any way defending a rapist. I also think it's something that a lot of people on either side of the political aisle don't really want to look too closely at. This is just my opinion, but based on what I've seen, I think a lot of Trump supporters know that Trump has some pretty big character flaws and don't want to look too closely if one of those flaws are mentioned. I think on the other side of the aisle, the never Trumpers are eager to look for any reason to not like Trump, and if they hear he's been held civilly liable for sexual assault, that's all they need to hear. But personally speaking, there were just a lot of misconceptions that I had of this case just based on reading headlines and hearing about it generally. And when I looked into it further, I discovered some things, and I don't want to tell anybody what to think. You should obviously do your own research, form your own opinion. But I do think people should at least be forming their opinions based on their best understanding of the facts. So one thing that I wanted to mention is the fact that this case was determined in 2023. The actual incident of sexual assault happened in the 1990s. Now, this was confusing to me because typically there's a statute of limitations that means that there's only so long after an incident happens that you can go to court and try to get compensation for it. What happened here was that there was an exception. There was a new law in New York where there was a 6-month window where you could go to court and contest cases like this no matter how far in the past they had happened. Now, for me, just sort of paying attention a little bit, I had heard that Trump was convicted of this just last year, and I was like, oh my gosh, like he's still doing this stuff. Not that it's ever right to do that stuff, but the fact that it had happened so recently was something that I considered significant in my understanding of the whole situation, and turns out that entire understanding was wrong. Another thing that I was confused about was the term being held civilly liable. Now, my common understanding of what happens when you go to court is if someone convicts you of something, that means that they've determined that you're guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. So I was kind of curious about, like, okay, well, if this happened in the 90s, what, do you have DNA evidence? Like, how were you able to determine that Trump was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt for something so far in the past? Turns out my entire understanding was wrong. Being held civilly liable just means that when you look at the facts, the jury decided this is more likely true than untrue. Now, because that is the standard that Trump was being held to, I do think it is relevant to mention that this case was tried in the Southern District of New York. That district is known for being very progressive in the way that they decide court cases. So I don't think it's an exaggeration to say what this case really meant was that people in a very liberal district in New York considered that it was more likely true than false that Trump had sexually assaulted a woman in the past. Which, I don't know, I mean, I think we already knew that, right? Like, we know that very progressive people have a poor understanding or a poor opinion of Trump and his behavior towards women. I think it is worth pointing out that that's not meaningless. That, I mean, this is based on, I know in the court case, Trump's voice recording of grab women by the pussy was definitely heavily relied on as evidence that this was in his behavior. And I don't think that's without merit. But I do think that what I had originally thought was that Trump was basically that there was damning DNA evidence or something showing that Trump had assaulted this woman beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's not what happened. The final thing that I do want to mention is when you look into the actual story of what happened in the 90s, I'm hesitating because I don't want to inject my opinion into this. I just want to mention that it looks like there were some mixed signals that were happening in the 90s. What happened was that E. Jean Carroll was at a department store shopping. She ran into Donald Trump. They ended up going into the lingerie department together. They were joking around. They were flirting with one another. Trump found this sheer gray pantsuit, and he suggested to E. Jean Carroll, hey, you should try this on for me. So then E. Jean Carroll and Donald Trump headed into a dressing room together. And that's when E. Jean Carroll was saying that she was assaulted. That's all I'm going to say. I encourage you to make up your own mind about everything, but I just hope that you know this stuff and you have a proper understanding of the facts of this case.